Hey, what's up, fellas? Today we're going to be talking about this self-destructive behavior. It's called a success mindset. And see, a lot of people want to try and promote the success mindset as something that's really great. And I'm not saying that it's bad. However, whenever you become dependent upon success to make you feel validated, to make you feel like you have worth and value, it is self destructive. And oftentimes it's preventing you from actually succeeding at the thing that you want to achieve at. And many of us have no idea that this is actually happening. We're going to break this down today on Elite Performance with Dr. Brad. So a couple questions for you. How do you feel when you don't succeed at something? That's a real question. How do you feel when you don't succeed at something? How do you feel about yourself when you fail to reach your goal? This is an interesting question because this is not the motivational stuff at the beginning, right? Like I'm hitting you with a real question. Like, how do you feel about yourself whenever you fail to reach that goal that you've set for yourself? We all go through it. And if you're anything like me, sometimes I just beat myself up way too much. And it creeps up on me. I don't even realize I don't even realize that I'm doing it sometimes. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. This thing is this self-destructive pattern, this self-destructive mindset of success in which we become so dependent upon succeeding or achieving at something so that we can have a sense of worth and value. Again, this is a self-destructive behavior when we become dependent upon success to establish our identity and to give us a sense of worth and value. Success mindset is great. However, we cannot become dependent upon achievement. We cannot become dependent upon success. We're going to be talking about that today. So this today's episode started with a conversation that I had with a really good friend of mine. He's also a performance coach, great guy. And we were having a conversation and he was asking me, how are things going? And I told him, things are going great, but that I wasn't where I wanted to be in certain areas. I was like, listen, man, I got so many things going on. I'm launching the podcast. I got a spiritual growth and personal development program that I'm launching. I'm writing all these different emails to provide value to people. And as I was talking to him, a lot of what I was saying sounded very negative in the form that I was not where I wanted to be. And he asked me a couple real simple questions. He said, "What's the rush?" He said, "What's the rush?" And that made me think. And the conclusion I came to is that the rush was really just for me to get this out there, for me to get this going, for me to succeed in these different areas of life, or really in these different areas of my coaching business. And he said something as we were kind of talking about this that just kind of hit me square in the face. He was like, "Look, it sounds to me like you're dealing with feelings of shame and inadequacy, which is what is pushing you to move this faster because you feel like you're not where you want to be. And so therefore, in order for you to feel better about you, you got to get this out." And man, I was like, wow. First of all, it's one of those tough looks in the mirror that's, it's hard looking in the mirror sometimes. But because I'm trying to grow, I had to sit back and, respect his view of things, because he's able to see this with me being in the frame of the picture, right? Oftentimes we can't see our own picture because we're in the frame. And so I had to respect that he was seeing something that I couldn't. And I had to sit in that for a few hours that day and realize, like, wow, the work that I had already done, that I thought I had overcome this idea that I cannot place my worth and value in myself based on how successful or unsuccessful I am at something, I was like, man, I thought I had, overcome that, but it's a constant work in progress. And it's interesting because after I had that conversation with him, I had a coaching call with someone who was saying the exact same thing, a very successful individual in what they do, and in their business, in the food business, in the art industry. And he was telling me, he said, I really want to be successful. I really want to be successful, but I feel like I'm becoming a slave to success. And the exact conversation that my friend Brian had with me, I had that conversation with my client. And it just helped me to realize that there is this fine line when it comes to talking about success, when it comes to going after success or going after achieving something, that we cannot become dependent upon the success to define our worth and value. And we go down this slippery slope whenever our worth and value, and we try to receive validation from outcomes and results that oftentimes, we cannot control. All right. So here's the problem. Here's the problem. Many of us are striving to achieve something to help us feel better. We're trying to achieve something. We're trying to go after being successful, so that we can have a sense of value and worth and significance, and in essence, feel validated. And we're dependent upon this external stuff. And what we're going after oftentimes is whatever we've labeled as success. And so, or as achievement. And once we achieve something or succeed at something, then it brings us this sense of worth and value as a man. We're going to break down this word dependent here in a minute, because that's the key word in terms of how this whole success mindset becomes destructive. Because having a success mindset is not bad, but it's when we become dependent upon success for our validation. It's when we become dependent upon success for our self-worth, right? It's like, once I earn the money, I now have made it, or I will now feel better about myself. Once I lose the weight, I will now feel like I've made it, or I feel better about myself. Once I launch the next project, and not just launch the next project, but once it's very successful, then I feel better about myself. And we're hanging on to the success. Once I succeed at the next thing, now I feel better about myself. And we become a slave to the success. We become dependent on success and achievement to validate us and to feel worthy. And the definition of dependence, check this out. The definition of dependence is relying on or being controlled by someone or something else. I mean, listen to this. Definition of dependence, being dependent on something, is relying on or being controlled by something else. So we are now relying on and being controlled by, whether we succeed or not, for our happiness, fulfillment, validation, and feeling of self-worth. And here's what's crazy about that. Oftentimes, our outcomes or our results or success is not completely 100% dependent on us. There is a God that is in control of things more than we are. There are things that our success is dependent on something outside of us. I mean, you think about COVID. COVID has destroyed certain businesses, not because the business was bad, but like COVID, no one expected COVID to happen. And imagine placing your value and your self-worth on how successful your business is. Your business goes down on something that you had absolutely no control over, like COVID. And now so does your self-worth and value go down along with what it's been dependent on, what it's been relying on, what it's been controlled by. One of the synonyms for dependence is addiction. One of the synonyms, check this out, for dependence is addiction. You can literally become addicted to success. You can become addicted to it and it can be bad. If you hadn't figured this out by now, all of the things that are so many things that are good in life can be turned into something bad. Success is one of them. And so the problem with this whole idea we're talking about today in terms of becoming dependent upon success for your self-worth and value and to be validated by your results or outcomes in life is that first thing is that when you don't achieve or when you don't succeed at something, you now feel inadequate. Because again, your self worth, your value, your fulfillment was tied directly to whether you succeeded or did not. And when you don't, the feelings of inadequacy, the feelings of I'm not enough, the feelings of I am a failure, I am whatever my outcome is, in essence. And so that's tough. You're on top of the world whenever you win, but if you're not, you are in hell, right? The second reason why this is a problem is because it never becomes enough. Success will never become enough. If you think about the idea of some of an addiction, whether it's alcohol or drugs or porn, whatever the case may be, what happens is that there's a certain pleasure that happens whenever you interact with that or you receive that thing, that whatever it is. And whenever you become desensitized to that level of whatever it is, you need more in order to feel that same feeling of pleasure that you did at that initial level. So at some point, it just becomes never enough, right? So what satisfied before won't continue to satisfy. So whenever you become successful at something and you've stayed there at that level, well, guess what? It's like, I can't stay here. Again, my worth is tied to success. I need to succeed more. If I'm not, it's like coming down from a drug. And so you become addicted to it. So now it's like, I gotta get more, gotta get more, gotta get more. And now it turns into a vicious cycle because you're constantly in chase of a place that you can't get to. Because every time you get there, you got to get to the next thing. And now the feelings of inadequacy happen again because you're not where you're supposed to be. It's a slippery slope. So when we become dependent on something outside of us, check this out. When we become dependent, when our value and self-worth is dependent on something external from us, right? Success, money, titles, what other people say. When our value becomes dependent on something external from our being, on things that we can't control to provide validation and fulfillment for us, we set up an addictive relationship with whatever the outcome is that we want. In this case, success, money, titles, status. And our identity becomes linked with our outcomes and results in life. It's a slippery slope. It's bad. I've been there before to where, look, if I'm crushing it in my clinic, if I'm making a lot of money, then I have a sense of value. I have a sense of worth. I'm adequate. I'm great. I'm good because of my outcomes. However, when that business starts going downhill, whenever things are happening that oftentimes are completely outside of my control, I'm now a failure. I'm now inadequate. I go as my results and outcome goes. And that's a roller coaster that I don't want to deal with anymore. But again, this takes work because it can creep up on you. Okay. So here's a question that you can ask yourself, just check yourself is this. How would you feel about how would you feel about yourself? How would you feel about you if the success in your current career or business completely stopped? I mean, I just want you to sit in that for a second. Think about that. How would you feel about you if the success in your current career or business completely stopped? If you feel like you would start having feelings of inadequacy, like you're not enough, like you got to go achieve the next thing. Like, oh, that didn't work. Well, I just gotta go achieve the next thing. I gotta go find something else. You might be on that slippery slope. And you got to be honest with yourself. Okay. Now, you can feel an emotion of feeling inadequate for a second, but you cannot stay in that emotion. If you stay in that emotion, that's not good, right? We all have feelings and emotions. I'm not saying you won't have feelings of emotions sometimes every now and then, but like you can't sit in it. You can't start to believe it, as truth that you are a failure, that you are inadequate. Sometimes these feelings happen, but you got to be able to block them out. So, how do you avoid becoming dependent upon success for your validation? How do you avoid this self-destructive uh, mindset, being dependent upon success for your validation and self-worth? There's three things that you have to understand. First thing is your validation must come from internal, not external from you. Your validation as a man, as a phenomenal man, must come from internal, inside, not anything external from you, not from what other people say, not from what the results or the outcome is, not from whether you've made a certain amount of money in a certain amount of time, not whether you achieved a certain title by a certain age. All that stuff is external. It must come from internal. The reason that is because you cannot control anything that happens external from you. The only thing that you can control as a human being on this earth is your choices and decisions. That's it. You can't control what your kids do. You can't control what your wife does. You can't control what other people does. You can't fully control your outcomes in life. All you can control is the decisions that you make. And whenever you tie your validation to something that is external from you, you are basically saying, I'm going to hitch my value and level of adequacy and fulfillment on something that I don't have control of. And when that thing goes wild or goes downhill, so will you. And so here's the second thing that you have to understand is that your validation must come from who God says you are. And that's going back to number one, is that it must come from internal. Your validation of who you are as a man must come from who God says you are. One, because this does not change. This is the exciting part. This does not change. Who God says you are does not change. He says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. He says that you are more than a conqueror. He says that you are just beneath the angels, man. He says that you are made in his image. This does not change. And this is truth. This is truth, right? But this also takes work to be reminded of this constantly, because the world is going to try to convince you, man, that you need to wear that suit and know that you're defined by how good you wear that suit, and that you wore that suit because you earned that suit, because you put the work in, and that your worth is tied to who you are as a business owner, or your title as a doctor, lawyer, accountant, whatever it is that you do. Not at all, man. Not at all. The truth is what God says about you, and your validation must come from who God says you are. And third and final thing that you must understand is that you will safely experience more success. And I say safely because the way we're talking about dependence upon success for validation is unsafe. It's not healthy. But you will safely experience more success once you depend on your identity in God than you do your identity in yourself by your results. So you will safely experience more success by depending on your identity in God than identifying yourself by your results. The reason this is because When you validate yourself from within and not from what anybody else says or any kind of external circumstance or outcome, when you understand who God says you are, you will then reflect and live a life based on the identity of who you believe you are, period. Now, if you understand that you can do phenomenal things, that you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you, can that you have the power of the Holy Spirit literally within inside you, that means you are dependent on that power, and that power makes you limitless. And now you will reflect that in your life. You won't be limited by how you are dependent upon a limited version of success that could potentially take you down the wrong way. You will have limitless potential whenever you understand that your identity in God is much more powerful than your identity being in your results. So here is what I need you to understand. Once you see yourself as God sees you, it's a wrap. And you know what? Honestly, I don't even know if we'll ever be able to see ourselves the way God sees us. But even if you could just see yourself as a fraction of the way that God actually sees you, it's a wrap. You'll start realizing, like, why did I ever limit myself to the goals and the results that I was like that I was going after back then? Right. And so, you know, once you realize that when you make a mistake or if there's a failure, or something happens, an outcome doesn't happen like the way you want it, or you make a mistake on the path toward whatever goal that you're going after, it's no different than just a missed shot. It's no different than a missed shot. Like the best analogy I can give is if you're a sports fan and you watch basketball and you watch Steph Curry. Steph Curry is arguably the greatest 3-point shooter that's ever lived. Arguably. Definitely in this era, greatest 3-point shooter. Some might say Klay Thompson, but we ain't going to get into that. Point I'm making is this. If Steph Curry misses a shot, does that mean that he's no longer a great shooter? Well, you and I both know the answer. No, not at all. He identifies himself as a great shooter. That's why he shoots the next shot. Doesn't matter. He doesn't hesitate. Just because he misses 5 in a row, does that mean he's not a great shooter? No. And so when you start to understand your true identity, even if you make a mistake, all it is just like, doesn't change the fact that I'm fearfully, wonderfully made, and that I'm made in God's image, that I'm made to succeed and live in abundance and do wonderful things. Doesn't change that. Now you're not so up and down, roller coaster, dependent upon whether you win or fail at something for how you feel. And so you won't be a slave to time and circumstances. You will not be a slave to, it didn't, the results didn't happen in the time that I wanted them to, or they didn't happen the way, or they're not happening the way I thought they would. You won't be a slave to that because you will literally rest and live in the inevitability of the results that will happen because you know who your identity is. Period. This is a big idea. It's a big thing to wrap your head around. But here's what you have to understand. Here's the main principle and goal to learn tonight is this. Do not depend on whether you succeed or fail at something to define who you are. Define yourself by internal, not anything external from you. And watch what happens to your level of fulfillment and your level of success in life.